first of the topics that we're going to be looking at today is quite a little one. The world is moving faster than ever, as I think we're all aware of, and especially if you think about technology, innovation and information. And we were just wanting to have a little discussion about how we think this will impact on consumers, companies and brands. So again, nothing too big to kick off with. I'm wondering who'd like to put their hand up amongst the panel and jump in there and give us a view on how the fast-moving world of everything impacts on everything.
I'm not sure if everything is moving that fast, actually. I think I'd probably rephrase it to say that things are moving at more vastly different speeds than they have ever moved before. So we're doing some very old things at very big scales. We're doing some very new things at very small scales, and lots of stuff in between. So we're building more cities than we've ever built before, ever. There are more cities going to be built in the next sort of 5 years than have ever been built, or more kind of sort of square mileage of kind of urban construction is going to be done, and not much of it in Europe or America. Most of it in kind of a kind of archipelago of sort of China and Western India, that sort of area. So I think it's more about the tensions between all of these different speeds, with some things moving so quickly and at such huge scale, and some things really not having moved very much at all. And I think that's why it feels so discombobulating, and I think that's why the sort of rate of change feels so weird. At least that's my sort of take on it. And some of the things that don't move very fast at all are actually technology. Technology often doesn't move as fast as we'd like it to at some levels, and in terms of sort of where it sort of intersects with our culture, it moves too fast sometimes, and we wish we could roll it back, and of course we can't. So I think it's more that...
Can you think of any specific examples that come to mind?
Being able to play really bad R&B on your speakers on your mobile phone on a bus, for instance. Sorry if you do that. Perfectly valid lifestyle choice. Keep buying the phones. Still have Nokia stock. But I think, you know, in terms of kind of the way in which, I think the core of your question is, we seem to think that there are a whole bunch of things that move really, really quickly, and we don't adjust fast enough to them. And it's about identifying where those kind of strata of what's moving quickly is unassailable in terms of its speed, and where it's kind of designable in terms of its speed.
Yep.
I think for me, a lot of it is kind of fairly wrestlable with once you sort of get over your kind of this kind of shock and awe, I suppose.
I think I'm sort of looking at that from a language point of view, and people have been talking about the death of the novel, you know, ever since the novel was created, and the novel as a form of technology. But actually, sales of the novel in this country are going up. So we're not really seeing the death of the novel at all. And I don't know if any of you saw Newsnight last night, but Martin Amis, who I have a bit of a love-hate thing with, but anyway, he was just pointing out that that there's something implicit in good novel writing in terms of the momentum of a narrative, which is incredibly enduring, and you can see connections between that and the way that all sorts of other media are presenting language and ideas. One of the interesting side comments he made was that while we're seeing the novel thriving in this country, poetry is sort of becalmed, and that he wondered whether this was because we felt that we didn't have time for the poetic. And I'm not entirely sure what he meant by that, but I wonder whether what he meant was, while on the one hand the novel drives forward with momentum and power, and we all want to get to the next bit, we haven't got so much time for contemplation.
I quite like the change that I think is going on rapidly in our society. I mean, I don't know if you can hear me or not when I do that, but I do like the fact that it's changing with these masses of people coming into our country from all sorts of places, I think that's quite interesting, actually. And I quite like the fact that they're almost there's a tendency to think that we're being overwhelmed. And I think we've always been kind of involved in that, but I think it does give us a kind of sharpness, which is actually thrilling. Because I think that we think, who the bloody hell am I here? Who am I in this world? I think that's quite interesting. You know, in my little teeny way, I buy, get a new phone. I think, Jesus Christ, I can't use this. Can't use this. Oh my God! Oh my God! And then you can see people that you see walking down where I live, the lanes at 10 and 12 at night, with a plastic bag around their shoulders, being the new people through in our country. And I kind of think, actually, I quite like that. I quite like this elemental change that's going on. And I quite like no smoking in pubs. Not because I like no smoking in pubs, but I quite like change.
I think change is change, particularly when you're young. Change is really thrilling. It's exciting. I think it's interesting how young everyone is here. I mean, so I'm really struck looking at everyone. I mean, I'm relatively old.
But you want to get old, mate?
Sorry.
This one, squire.
Relatively old, as opposed to absolutely. No, but I think it's quite interesting. If there was a group of young people 25 or 30 years ago who were all in one place and people gathered together to talk about things and stuff, they'd probably be sitting around smoking weed and trying to fix, you know, politics in Britain by signing up to a communist party or something like that, you know, and then we might have sat around and talked about punk rock. Broadly speaking here, although there's an artistic bent to the interest of this evening, there is a kind of business angle to what's going on. I mean, there's an idea that people might be able to create enterprise out of the changes that are going on. And I think one of the things that's interesting about change is that up to a certain speed, when change is the friend of people with experience, because you know, if there's normal national football and then you start playing international football, well, you go, great. I used to play football in Wigan, I can now play football in Germany. But if you suddenly change it and you go, right now we're going to do sumo wrestling, you know, the people who play football in Wigan are fucking useless at sumo wrestling. And when change goes really fast, it's crap for the people who are experienced. And that's why I think young people are interested in change as it affects business. Because there's a sense that they could get their hands on the fucking tiller and do stuff that other people can't do. I think that's really exciting.
Or afraid of doing.
Afraid of doing, because they're stuck, because change is actually, the fact that they've got systems and ways of doing stuff actually becomes a problem for them rather than an asset.